Hi, I'm Rebecca Bradley. This is the Virtual Crime Book Club. The date is Monday, the 12th of June, 2023. Today we are discussing Missing Pieces by Tim Weaver. We are lucky enough to have Tim with us today. If you are watching this as a recording, be aware that spoilers will be discussed. So you may want to finish the book or go and read the book before you finish watching the video. So we do have Tim present. I have written out a bio, so I will go through that now. I've truncated it a little bit from the website. Tim is the author of 14 novels, including the David Raker series and the standalone Missing Pieces, which we are discussing this evening. His books have been selected for the Richard and Judy Book Club 3 times. That is a massive achievement. Shortlisted for National Book Award and been nominated for both the Crime Writers Association Dagger in the Library and Ian Fleming Steel Dagger Awards. They've also been Sunday Times top 3 bestsellers. Tim is busy developing an original TV series alongside one of the drama team responsible for Line of Duty. So that must be thrilling for you.
Yeah, it's very exciting. It's something that I just project I kind of started in lockdown, because we were quite fortunate because our daughter's older, so we didn't have the like a lot of parents had with the young kids running around creating havoc and not sitting down and doing their schoolwork and stuff. My daughter was older, so she just logged on. So I just had plenty of time, and scripts are something that I've been thinking about for a while. So I actually wrote 2 pilot scripts for 2 different series, and it was the second one that got taken on by Jed Mercurio's production company. So yeah, that's in development, but TV just takes forever. So
Yeah.
it's because it's in development, it doesn't mean it's actually going to get made. Although, there's some positive stuff happening behind the scenes, but it's nothing imminent. But it's been exciting. It's an
experience to write it, I imagine.
It is, yeah. I mean, a lot of the same rules apply, as writing books. I mean, you're still essentially telling a story, and when you're writing a thriller, trying to keep people, in this case, glued to their TV screens rather than glued to the pages of a book. So the principles are the same, but I would say the major difference is that with a book you have it's quite a singular process, and you have quite a big level of control over what goes into it. Whereas with TV, it begins as a very singular process because you write it, but then it becomes a very, very, very multi-disciplined process where everyone and their dog is having a say on it, and you can't put this scene in because we don't have the budget for it, or we can't shoot this scene because we can't find the location, or whatever it is. Whereas with a book, you can kind of put anything you want in there, and largely it remains your. I mean, obviously all books get edited, but largely it remains your vision. Whereas with TV, it's a little less like that. But still, it's it's exciting, and still in the very early stages of it, and I'm still really, really surprised that someone is as sort of well known as Jed Mercurio was even remotely interested in it, to be honest. But it was made me very proud and excited. So we'll see what happens with it.
Yeah, it sounds great. You'll have to excuse the dogs. Usually they're downstairs with my husband, but he's upstairs now, and I've just texted him and told him to pick him up.
That's all right, don't worry.
So excuse that. How difficult did you find it with the scripts? Because with books, you get the inner voice. And with scripts, you have to, everything. With writing, we are always told, show, don't tell. But with scripts, it's the other way around. You are kind of telling through visual effect, aren't you, really?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is different to an extent, and I think with a script, it is a large proportion of it is I mean, you can write the best script in the world, but I mean, if it doesn't get the right actors in the right roles and you don't have the right people attached behind the scenes, it can really fundamentally disable a project, you know. So I mean, how many times have we watched something on TV where it's been written by someone who is, we all know is a great writer, but it turns out to be, you know, disappointing or whatever because the performances aren't quite there, or you know, the casting's not right, or the director's not the right director for it, or whatever it is. You know, there's all sorts of reasons why a television or film project doesn't end up as good as it looks on the page, you know. So I think a lot of it is just in that, you know, comes in that stage. But I think both mediums are, you know, they're both visual mediums in a way, you know, because with a book you're painting a picture, and with a script you're painting a picture. It's just you're doing it in slightly different ways. With a book, everything is in there, you know. So you have your dialogue, you have your description, you know, the narrative is a real combination of both. Whereas with a script, it's really predominantly dialogue, and, you know, relatively few descriptive passages, more direction, you know. So they are different, but I think they do share a lot of DNA, you know. And I think what I discovered when I started writing scripts was that you can actually put a script together a hell of a lot quicker than you can put a book together, you know. So an episode of a TV show, I mean, on average, my books take me about 10 months to write, you know. But the TV script, even though it was, you know, pretty much the first time I'd done it, you know, I had an episode up together in under a week, really, you know.
Seriously?
Yeah, it's really quick because you're not having to, as long as you've got the plot kind of clear in your head, you know, you're not having to do any of the descriptive stuff, you know. Dialogue is a lot easier and faster to write than description, you know. So and because I think 60 minutes of a TV show is very, very different to 450 pages of a book. You know, 450 pages of a book, you've got a lot of balls in the air, you know, you're juggling a lot of stuff. Whereas with 60 minutes of a TV show, you're not, you know. Like the difficulty with a TV show is that we're actually, you know, that 60 minutes is like basically a chapter or a part of a book, you know. So it'd be like writing a book, one part of a book, and getting it published, you know. So it is obviously going to be quicker, but you still have to think about them in the same way, you know. With the TV show, I had to plan out the whole of the first season, which is actually a very different way of working because I don't tend to plan my books. So I just kind of write them and see where they go. Whereas with scripts, because the TV networks want a clear idea of where it's going, you have to plan out the whole series and show where it's going and where it's going to go after that. So that was probably the biggest difference for me, to be honest, aside from the fact that one is dialogue heavy and one is more descriptive. It was the fact that I had to plan the TV script, whereas I don't plan my books.
Well, that was a little side road. We are here to talk about your books. I got a little bit carried away with the screenwriting there.
That's all right.
You are well known for the David Raker series, who is a civilian investigator who searches for missing people. What was it about this story in Missing Pieces that made you decide to set it as a standalone and not part of Raker's world?
Well, it had been a story I've been thinking about for a while, and I sort of had this idea of a mum being separated from her kids and having no way of, you know, getting back home, and people not really having a idea that she was still alive, and having to survive, you know, away from them, and trying to find a way back to them for a while. And actually I did try to make it work inside of one of the Raker books a few times, actually, because I'd had the beginnings of what became Missing Pieces written, actually, like the first 4 or 5 chapters, for quite a long time, probably like 4 or 5 years before I actually went to start the book and it became Missing Pieces. so it was my intention actually to make this story part of the Raker series, but it never quite felt like it belonged there. And so over time, I just felt like it was something that it was this idea that wouldn't leave me, basically. And I think when you get ideas like that, they don't disappear for a reason. They don't disappear because they kind of need to be told, or at least I felt that way. So I'd done 10 Raker books on the Spin across 10 years. And although I love writing the Raker series, I felt like 10 books was a good point to just take a break for a year and write Missing Pieces. And I also felt conversely that it would be good for the Raker series, because I place great emphasis in those books on never falling back on the things I've done before and falling back on the same tricks. I always try to make each book different to the last one and be bigger, better, more kind of approach. So I felt like a year away from him would really benefit me. So there were all sorts of reasons why I felt now was the time to write Missing Pieces. But mainly it was because this idea just had been kicking around in my head for a while. I had the first few chapters written, and I felt like it was a story that I was engaged with, and the stories that are the ones that you pursue are always the ones that you feel like some kind of kinship with, sort of connection with, and so Missing Pieces was one of those for me, and that was why I decided to do it.
Talking of David Raker, congratulations on the recent publication of book 10, The Last Goodbye. How's that gone for you? Has that gone well?
It's book 14, actually, believe it or not.
Oh, is it book 14?
Yeah. Can you believe it? Blimey. But yeah, it has gone well. Thank you. Yeah, it's what's interesting about this discussion tonight actually is that in The Last Goodbye, the main character in Missing Pieces, Rebecca, is actually a big part of The Last Goodbye.
Oh,
so
right.
Yeah, so she's in The Last Goodbye. So it's been quite interesting that you guys have been reading this, because yeah, there are connections between the two. But yeah, it's gone well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how it's done yet because it only came out on Thursday, so we'll find out this week. Yeah. But people have been very kind about it so far, so hopefully it's people are enjoying it, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Even though Missing Pieces is a standalone, it's still in the missing person story. It's still a missing person story. What attracts you to this narrative?
Well, missing people are just, I suppose, have become my sort of area of expertise, if that's not too arrogant to say. Like I feel like it's a world I kind of know quite a bit about. So there was a practical element to it, I suppose. The main reason, though, really is that the world of missing people, I find fascinating, and I find it fascinating for all sorts of reasons, So I'm not sure what the latest figures are, but a few years ago, it was 250,000 people go missing in the UK every year. And although 99% of those are found after a year, 1% of those people don't come home and never found, So that's still 2,500 people that vanish into thin air every year. And of course, as a writer, you think to yourself, well, what are those people's stories? How have they done it? Why have they done it? Where have they gone? All that kind of stuff. Because, in the 21st century, it's actually really hard to disappear, because we're all so wired into technology now. So yeah, there was that side. But also what interests me about missing people, and what has been a fundamental part of the David Raker books, is that it's trying to get across just the more human side of things, the families who are left behind, who are grieving for someone who they have no idea where this person's gone, this person that many times they love more than anything in the world. They have no body to bury, they have no answers. And so this kind of like this perpetual sense of loss that is very, very unique and really, really terrible. And it was an area that I've always liked to explore in the books. I think it's an important part of the missing persons narrative, and I think it's important to represent these families' stories. And so, yeah, that's what's fascinated me about missing people, kind of all these different things. And of course, over the years, it's kind of become my thing, I suppose, so it's a nice sort of corner of the market that I've managed to carve out for myself.
Yeah. You did a podcast as well a couple of years ago, didn't you, about missing people?
I
Was
did,
that
yeah,
you?
yeah. It was me, yeah. You got the right person. It was basically about all the different stages of a disappearance. So right from the moment someone disappears and how they stay disappeared, the psychology of going missing, the technological hurdles that you have to jump over. We talked to forensic accountants and psychiatrists and people, one guy who actually helped people disappear for a living, and all sorts of other people. And then towards the end of the podcast, I had a go at disappearing myself. So we had the crew on the podcast sort of were trying to find me, and I had to went missing. So that was interesting, really interesting, because it shows you the kind of the more psychological aspects of it. We can all imagine the practical elements that come with disappearing, but it's the psychological side of it, I think, like staying missing and also leaving your life behind, even if that life isn't a very good life. It's still a life, and routines you have and all that kind of stuff. So it was really interesting, yeah. And people ask me about it often, so it was obviously something that people engaged with, which is what you want, really.
Yeah, I listened to it. It's a few years ago now. Was it pre-pandemic?
Yeah. No, yeah, it was. I think it's getting on for like 8 or 9 years ago now.
Really? Right. Yeah. I did. I found it interesting. So,
Thank you.
any readers that enjoyed the missing person element of it, it's worth actually looking it up, because it's still out there, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the first few excuse me, I think the first few episodes there's some copyright problem with it, so I don't think they're available, but the sort of second 2/3 are
Right.
still available, I think. So yeah, you can definitely listen to me disappearing if that is the sort of thing you like listening to.
You're British, Tim, and David Raker is British, and the whole Raker series, he's London based, even though he travels around. But you set Missing Pieces in the US. Why did you transfer the whole story into a different country? Are you familiar with the States at all?
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time there. So yeah, it was more just it was a number of things, really. One was that I wanted a very definite dividing line between the Raker stories and Missing Pieces. So, geography was one way of doing that. A female lead was another way of doing that. I've grown up kind of reading American mystery fiction and thriller fiction and crime fiction much more actually than the British crime and mystery fiction. So American fiction's had a big influence on me. So I suppose it was a desire to kind of write a book set there because I spent so much time there and know it so well, and also because I've read so much fiction set in the States. So a number of things, really. I mean, I made her born, she was born in Britain, obviously. I made her have that youth here in the UK because I felt, as a Brit writing, Americans, sometimes you have to be careful that your voice doesn't slip. It's very important that if Americans read it, it doesn't read like a British guy writing Americans. It's like when you watch TV shows or whatever, and some guy's doing a British accent who isn't British, or an American accent and they're not American. Sometimes you can just hear like they don't quite get it, and you sort of immediately pulled out of the moment when you're watching it. And that was a big consideration for me with the voice. With Rebecca, it was important that even though she has spent all her adult life in the US, she still has the still anglicized in a lot of ways, and therefore if the voice isn't quite there, it doesn't matter as much, because you know she spent the first 18 years of her life in the UK, and also I wanted her to kind of be a character who was, although she's, like I say, spent the majority of her life in the US, still a little bit of an outsider, you know, because that runs in parallel with her on the island and her being alone, and when you're an outsider you're alone. So there were these two elements that definitely were reflections of one another that I felt were an important part of the book. And so yeah, a number of reasons really, but mostly because I just thought I wanted a clear dividing line between what I'd written before and what I've done since, and Missing Pieces.
Yeah, I know we're taking up time now. I have got some questions, but I will open it up to see if any of the readers have any before I just ask one more or so. Does anybody have any questions for Tim? Silence from the room. Oh, Marina, go on then.
Hello, I haven't read yet the latest Raker one, but I have read The Blackbird, and which is such a great setup. I mean, you know, a car accident and then the people, you know, that were supposed to be in the car are not there. Are you ever afraid that you might run out of these sort of really great hooks?
Not really, no. I mean, you often get asked, you know, do you are you worried that, you know, you'll run out of ways to make people disappear? And I think it's not really ever something that particularly troubles me, because I think that there are infinite ideas, basically. You know, we have ideas all the time. You know, you might not think that you do, but you know, when we sit down in front of the TV and watch a show and we've finished an episode, and then we say, well, that was good, but it would have been better if blah 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 blah. You know, like you're having an idea there and then about how to make something better. So ideas for me are not such an issue. So I never. And that's not being arrogant. I'm just saying that, you know, some ideas you have are terrible. So you know that those are not the ones that you want to pursue. So I'm not saying all ideas are great, but ideas come to you at all times. So, and ways to make people disappear, you know, come to me all the time as well. So obviously the most important thing, because I'm getting old now, is to write those down before I forget them. And then, you know, it's then a question of taking it's then a question more of what ideas you use, you know, not really whether you're going to have the ideas. I think that's the most important thing, because it's very difficult sometimes to know which idea is going to sustain a whole book, and until sometimes you're actually writing it, and then you get a much clearer idea of what's going to work and what isn't. So yeah, no, I don't worry about it too much. Maybe I'll change my tune in 10 books time when I've suddenly run out of ways to make these people disappear. But for the time being, I'm all right. I'm writing a new book at the moment, and I've got another way to make people disappear. So I'm all right for the time being.
Craig, did you put your hand up?
I did. So hi Tim, thank you for coming.
Hi, how you doing?
With Missing Pieces, there was, as I saw it, there's three distinct sort of stories going on and sort of interlinked, going back and forth in time. When you write it and develop it, do you sort of do it in pods, or do you sort of wind it up as you go along and develop it?
Do you mean, do I write it chronologically or in?
Yeah.
Always chronologically, because I think look, I mean, there's lots of different ways to write a book. You know, there's no correct way to write a book. But for me, when you write it chronologically, you can then, it's sometimes harder to see the bigger picture and how each story is going to kind of unfold. But at the same time, I think it gives you, and when I say that, how each story unfolds on its own. But when you write it chronologically, it's much easier, I think, to see how they all fit together, and at which point you bring each element in. So, you know, with Missing Pieces, it employed a structure that I haven't actually used in any of my Raker books, which is this kind of before and after idea, you know. So trying to make those kind of two things kind of feed into one another was probably the trickiest bit, you know, knowing which stage to kind of bring in these before chapters, because I would say the after chapters are kind of like the forward motion. The before fills in a lot of the history, and obviously then you understand ultimately why this is happening to Rebecca. With the Frank Travis chapters, they were, I guess, a more traditional archetype, and certainly more a reflection of the kind of stuff I do in the Raker novels, which is an investigation that appears to be unrelated, but ultimately is connected. And so the Travis chapters were quite easy to feed in. It was more that before after structure that was the most difficult element, and but writing it chronologically for me is the easiest way to see where to drop, how many after chapters you need to before chapter, what ratio you need kind of to make it work.
Thank you. Cheers.
Did anybody else have a question? Are you putting your hand up, Jane? No. Okay. Okay, just one more from me then. It's just about the standalone versus series, Tim. Do you plan on doing any more standalones, or are you sticking with the series?
I've got no plans immediately. I'm not saying never say never, but I mean, my new book that came out on Thursday is another Raker book, and then the one I'm writing at the moment is a Raker book. So yeah, nothing at the moment, and I think it would have to be the right idea for me to do it. Missing Pieces was like I said earlier, was an idea I couldn't let go, and so therefore it became an idea that I knew I needed to write. And I think if I got another idea like that came along, where it was very, very difficult for me to forget it, then I would think about it definitely. The series, in many ways, the series is easier in a way, even though the series brings with it its own complications, which is that you need to kind of sustain it over a long period of time and make sure that the books are not all feeling the same, and are very, very individual and different. The series, you have to, with a standalone story, you have to it was sort of a while before I kind of found Rebecca, whereas with David Raker, I know him so well that you're in there, minute one, you're on, as soon as he's on the page, you kind of know him. But I feel like with the Raker books, they all act as standalones anyway. You can come in at any stage in the Raker series. You don't really have to, loads of people, I can't tell you how many people get in touch and say I read them all out of order and they still enjoyed them, So it's not like I never write standalones. All the Raker books operate as standalones in themselves. So I think if I didn't have that, maybe I would feel more need to get back to writing another standalone. But because I feel like every Raker book kind of operates as its own thing, and then has different characters and different kind of approach. Yeah, I don't feel any compulsion at the moment to do another standalone. I'm really glad that I did. I love the experience of writing Missing Pieces, and it was a brilliant experience, and it's been really nice kind of weaving it into, I mean, hopefully everyone's finished it, but weaving it into the Raker universe as well, so that's been a fun part of it. And so no plans at the moment, but maybe in the future. Okay, great.
You've already said what's next. You're currently writing a Raker. Where can readers find you online?
timweaverbooks.com, or you can follow me on Facebook. There's links on my website, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. So
all the usual
social channels. Yeah.
All right. Thank you for your time
worries.
This evening. I'm sorry we've run a little bit long, but it was really interesting. Thank you.
Okay. No worries.
Thank you.
Tim. So that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, thought we'd lost somebody else then. Oh, let me get my breath back. We didn't half jump into that meeting. I flew through the door and straight into the meeting. Okay, for anybody who is watching the recording, I was babysitting until about 5 minutes before the meeting. Okay, on to the next section. Usual question. Did you enjoy the book? Or did you not enjoy the book?
Yeah, enjoyed it.
Yes, halfway. Anything other than a halfway? Oh, proper no. So it's either a yes or a no.
There were things I liked about it and things I was less keen on, and I think the things I was less keen on, I think some of them were quite, in my mind, were you know, slightly significant issues, I think.
Okay. Who wants to start us off with? Marina, you were.
Yeah, so I was just thinking it was interesting that he said that he was struggling with the before and after, because that was the bit that actually annoyed me about the book, because I felt that there was like a deliberate withholding of information to make it more exciting and so on. And it's funny because I have read at least The Blackbird and possibly one of the others in his Raker series, and that wasn't the case there. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that the kind of first explicit act of violence or threat is when Rebecca's on the island and doesn't, you know, the attempt is on murdering her and her brother, but that doesn't happen until a long way into the book. And, you know, it's like you're reading a crime book where there's no body. You don't know what's happened until halfway through. Yeah. There were lots of things I enjoyed about it, though.
Okay, let's go with what people we usually start with what people enjoyed. So who wants to start telling us what they enjoyed about the book? You're muted, Vera. Well, you're not, but you're not coming through. No. Do you want to log out and come back in?
Well, I'll just sort of come in the meantime while we're waiting for Vera, and just sort of say that a bit like Clark, there was bits I enjoyed and bits I didn't. But I'm sort of going the other way and saying overall I did enjoy it. And what I didn't enjoy was like about the first, I can't remember, was it 60, 100 pages, when there just seemed to be so many characters and no connection between them. And I found it very disorientating. Fortunately, I read it in fairly big chunks so that I could get into it. But I think if I'd been dipping in and out of it, I would have felt very sort of have no idea who anyone is. But I think that once she was on the island, apart from the fact that she annoyed me because the first thing you want to do is anybody, I think, is to find shelter and food. And she seemed to sort of, no, I won't bother looking in any of these houses where there might be any of that. But apart from that, yeah, I enjoyed it, her journey on the island, you know, sort of getting to know herself and what she could do and all that. Yeah.
So you enjoyed Rebecca's viewpoint on the island?
Yes,
And what was it you didn't enjoy, Lorna?
Well, I think it was the characters were so muddled in my head for so long into the book.
Was that because of the switching?
Partly the switching, but partly because there seemed to be quite a few of them, and you didn't really know what the connections were. So yeah, probably the switching is what caused the confusion in my head.
Do you have sound, Vera?
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Yes.
Yeah, it's because I'm on holiday, so I'm outside.
It looks lovely.
I did enjoy the book. I thought it was like a fun book to read. It was fast paced, and although it felt slightly long. I was like, okay, come on, leave the island. It's too much. It's so much suffering. But I did enjoy the book. I think it was interesting, this idea of someone being totally isolated and trying to survive. And so I thought the idea was nice. And opposite to some people, I quite enjoyed the before and the after. I enjoy when the writers hide some of the things and we only discover this later. So yeah, for me that worked. The only thing I thought was that, okay, there are too many villains. There were too many crimes. Why were they killing everyone? So I thought that was a bit too much. Why did they kill the professor? The first thing they did when they arrived in the island, why? So it was the only thing I thought it was too much in terms of all the killings just to cover up the rapes.
Did you not understand the motivations?
I understood the motivations. I just did not feel that the motivation was strong enough to justify murdering so many people. That said, I enjoyed the book.
Craig, go on.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the book, and I like the fact that we were drip fed information. We had to keep reading and trying to find out and where is this. And I love the fact that we had these three distinct stories going on: the survival story, the detective story, and the historic sort of part of the family and the breaking up. And it was all sort of interlinked with was it Rebecca, the main character, and when she was, you know, psychologically, her mind was playing tricks of her, and did she trust this person and that person, and the links back and forth. And I really did enjoy it. And you know, there were a lot of characters, and sometimes I had to write them down and think, who's this one and who's that one? But you know, it was missing pieces. To me, it was a title. There was loads of little bits and pieces, and you slowly built this up. And that's what that question I was trying to ask, you know, how did he go about doing this? Because, you know, I really enjoyed it, and so much so I instantly downloaded David Raker. I've never read one before, so I instantly downloaded that straight away. To thought, right, I'm going to have a quick look at this as well, because it was.
Which one have you started with? Have you gone?
It's the very first one. The very
first one.
Yeah, I do everything in order. When he's saying people just jump in, I cannot. Do. I have to read in order. So it's book one.
I do as well. I would have gone for the first one. Yes. So, Clark, you were saying that there were some things that had issues for you.
Yeah, I mean, I read the book very quickly. It was very easy to read. I really liked some things about it. The short chapters I always like. Yeah, I thought Tim was very clever at putting hooks at the end of chapters. So quite often she would say, you know, things like, and then I looked up and saw him coming towards me. We don't know who it is, but we rush on to the next chapter to find out. And that, you know, I thought that was very cleverly done. I mean, I thought the structure was quite complex. I was surprised when he said he sat down and read it, sat down and wrote it in one go. You know, because I would have thought he's got to have some sort of enormous spreadsheet to work all this out, surely, and get everything fit together. But there were things that I found difficult about it. I think that, first of all, well, I think any thriller has a level of implausibility about it, and you know, readers take that on from the beginning. And I guess an author has to balance the implausibility of the jeopardy that the characters are put in with the thrill. You know, because if the jeopardy wasn't very dangerous, you know, it wouldn't be very thrilling. So I think there's a balancing act there, and I just found some of it quite, just tipped over the edge of implausibility for me. But if you set that aside, that's fine. If you like that kind of thing. But I found that there were a couple of issues. I mean, Rebecca as a character, you know, we're told bits about her life, her career, her family, her relationships. And we're told lots of times that she loves her children. It was almost as though that was the main thing about Rebecca. You know, parents love their children generally. You know, but time and again, we're told she loves her children, she loves her children. That was something that, you know, quite often eventually I just felt I don't really care about Rebecca. I don't care that much about Rebecca, quite honestly. She's not dislikable, but I just don't know enough about her to actually care what happens to her. And she was very sort of, I found her really passive as a character. You know, a lot of the jeopardy that she was put in was from her own kind of stumbling into it or doing something slightly, you know, naive. And yet she never actually got out of those moments of jeopardy through her own skill, through her own quality. You know, she was always rescued, you know, during it. She was rescued by a dog. She was rescued by Travis. She was rescued at the end. She's even rescued by the chief of police, who has a sudden change of heart about killing her. You know, she gets it put in. She gets into jeopardy through, you know, misadventure, but she never gets out of it through her own means. It's always being rescued, and you know, for me, I found that quite problematic.
But she managed to survive in that island for like 5 months. I would have died after 1 week, so I'm pretty sure.
Tim said that she is quite a distinct character in the next book. What's it called? That's just been released, The Last Goodbye. Is anybody interested enough in Rebecca to follow up and read The Last Goodbye just to see where she ends up?
Yes, I'd like to see what happened. Why did her mother walk out on them? I suspect that one of the policemen is actually her mother.
I also thought that, but I think it was just a red herring.
I think so.
But yeah, but I thought that exactly, but I think it's a red herring. But maybe the next book, it's all about her looking for her mum, no?
I presume it is. I presume that's David Raker going to look for the mum and trying to find out why she left.
In a lot of crime novels, murder is usually the crime of the book. With Missing Pieces, it was missing persons. But in crime, the victim is usually a plot device, but here we know the victims. Did it interest you more seeing Rebecca on the island as part of the narrative? And how well did you think it was implemented? I mean, isn't that because
it's a thriller, really, rather than a kind of rather than having a more traditional structure? You know, in a thriller, your protagonist has to live. I mean, we know they're going to live.
I thought it was interesting that I couldn't work out what was going on, and clearly Rebecca couldn't work out what was going on either. She had no idea of people coming after her. I thought that was quite a clever way of building up the book.
That Clark, there are books, I've been told. I haven't read them yet. I don't know which they are, but I have been told there are the odd books out there where the protagonist dies about the second to last chapter. So don't be fooled just because the protagonist is talking.
That's pretty
they're going to
rare.
make it to the end.
That's pretty rare, and I think I'd feel
it is rare, but it happens.
I think I'd feel pretty cheated if that happened.
I don't know which book it is, but I have been told there is a book out there where the protagonist dies about the second to last chapter, and for the life of me, I can't remember what book it was that they were talking about. But yes. Yes, just watch out for that. What's this question, Robert? And there's about 10 sentences.
While you're thinking about that, I might just hop in and say hello from chilly Sydney while you're all sitting there sweating.
It's awful.
It's freezing here. But anyway, that's off the side. I really enjoyed this. I love the pace, but I try to get myself in the head of the author and think, you know, okay, I'm going to give reverence to you no matter what type of book I read, because it's obviously your journey and this is where you wanted to go. So let's go along for the ride. But I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the before and after. I enjoyed all the characters. And it wasn't until I got to the last end where I'm with Vera on this one that I just did not think that, you know, all this killing was justifiable by this horrible man. But, you know, I just, that was what I thought, oh, I don't know, this hasn't ended perfectly for me. I don't know how I would have wanted it to end, to be honest, but it didn't end, you know, where I go, yes. But I'm looking, and I really loved the lead in that he did. So you knew the next book was going to be about David Raker looking for her mum. You just knew that. And I thought, oh, this is going to be good. So yes, I'll be reading that book. But no, I love the pace. At the first time I saw the book, I thought, oh, bloody hell, this is a tome. And but yeah, the short chapters just made me keep reading and reading and reading and reading and reading. So yeah, I enjoyed that. Like I said, I enjoyed the amount of characters. I thought Rebecca was resilient, and I couldn't bloody stay on an island and live on a few cans of food and not go insane, or, you know, and sew my head up when I cracked it open. You know what I mean? So I think kudos to her. And so she loves her daughters. Fabulous. That was her thing. That was her means of getting by, having something to look forward to want to get off this thing. And as well as trying to work out what was happening to her, she always had this focus. I've got to get off. I've got to make it through. I've got to see my daughters. And I thought, yes, good for you, Rebecca. And I've already followed him on his podcast, which I'll be listening to intently. And I intend to go back and read the first of the David Raker books. So well done, Tim. You've got a new fan.
He will be pleased. How did people feel? That question I was reading, I don't even understand it myself. How did people feel about the structure with the back and forth time jumps, the current time with what was happening now and the backstory being in? Because backstory can be a bit of an issue.
It didn't do it for me, I'm afraid, and for that very reason, and I hate myself for it, because having listened to Tim this evening, what a lovely guy and absolutely fascinated, but every time I felt I was getting into the book, it was like blowing up a balloon and then suddenly the air going out of it. It would get to the end of his short chapters, which again I loved. I thought it was well written, and then suddenly would be taken to another place, and I just felt I lost the momentum that I had getting into the book, and I really struggled with it for that reason.
I didn't mind the back and the before and after structure. That I say again, particularly as other people commented, they were short chapters themselves. Funnily enough, the thing that irritated me was actually something that Clark said he quite liked, which was this kind of like you'd end a segment, you know, and it would say something like, but things were about to get a lot worse. And, you know, so that was, after a bit, I found that sort of like, I don't know what I'd call it. It's not false suspense, but it's kind of like using words to create a suspense in a way that you kind of, I say, just didn't. It got to the stage where I've first time fine, second time fine, and then after a bit I was thinking, oh, just cut to the chase, please. Can we? You know, I just found it mildly irritating. But having said that, overall I enjoyed the book. It was very pacey. Again, I did look at it, and when I got it out of the library, because it's hardback and it's about that thick, and I was thinking, oh God, that's gonna be a weighty tome. But actually, no, it was very readable, and I would quite like. And I'm, as I say, I'm quite interested in trying one of the David Raker books, particularly as it sounds like you don't have to read them in any particular order, because I've got so many books to read at the moment that the idea of embarking on another series that's got 14 in it, I've got to start at number 1, I actually would find slightly daunting. But I would love to try one of the others. So maybe I'll just go on to the straight to the last one and find out, with the hookup with Rebecca and how that goes on.
Well,
yeah.
he said you can start anywhere in the series.
Yeah. But as I say, overall a plus. Just that minor niggle of that stylistically I found just a bit irritating, but that was the only negative I could find.
It's called the cheap cliffhanger, where they say there's a knock at the door.
Yeah.
Rather than somebody enters the room with a gun.
Yeah.
There's a complete difference between the two. And I had to learn that myself because I was guilty of doing it.
Yeah. It's just like that. The only other person I can think of that I know
do it sometimes.
The only other person I can think of that I've seen who does it regularly is some of the Jeffrey Archer books I've read. Seems to do the same sort of thing. And actually, I'm not that I've read that many Jeffrey Archer ones because I don't particularly like his books, but I've read a couple and he does this sort of thing. And I just find it's just a personal thing. It just grates on me slightly. But as I say, overall, that was my only niggle. And it was, and I say the very fact that I picked it up and thought, oh God, I'm not going to get through this, and then really got through it really quite quickly.
Yeah.
I was a bit puzzled that they've got this ferry coming over the island, bringing all these cars. But once you're on the island, there's nobody there. So where were all the cars going that were coming over? I mean, the island was deserted, yet they supposedly were running ferries all the time, bringing cars over. But where were they going?
Oh, I think all the cars were leaving. And I think that when they came over, I think they were the only car, or there was only one other car. So I think people, because they kind of, and that was handled too briefly, I think, in the beginning, or it wasn't that he told that part of the story later, because of the, the back and forth, but because it confused me too. And then, but it sounded as if they were the last car to go over on the ferry. And I was wondering, and so everybody was leaving, but you're right, everything was closed up, and I think that was one of the problems with the book, is there were a lot of these little details that just didn't sit right with me, and that was one of them.
I think he tried to explain that and saying that her brother thought the island was closing on the 1st of November or the 31st, I'm not sure. And then it closed like one day earlier. And so they basically missed the last train. And then at the end, he said, yeah, because before they used to keep a record of the people that were coming in and leaving, but now nobody keeps a record anymore. So basically they didn't know they were still in the island. So I think he tried to address that, because I was also a bit puzzled, like, how is this possible that everything is closed already, everybody left, but I think he tried to explain that,
particularly when they opening the island up again. The detective was driving a car, and he said he kept well back so that he wouldn't see him, so there must have been more cars coming over when they're starting up again, but yet you didn't see any cars.
That's because they would have spread out throughout the island. But I mean, I realized this was a plot device to get them on the island, but you have to sort of say, why didn't you just wait a day when this professor would have been back on the mainland, rather than them having to go there in any case?
Did you find the way it was structured, did the way it was structured work the way it was meant to? Did it have you trying to guess what was happening, and did you keep changing your mind as you continue to read?
I really like the structure. I like a lot when the books go back and forth. I like all these confusing plots, and I like wonder what is going on, and so I like this. So
were you guessing, Vera, about
I was trying to guess, and I was like, I cannot, I have no clue, which is very annoying because I usually have some clue. So that's why I think I enjoyed it, because I was like, I'm totally clueless. I cannot understand why they are there, what is happening. But yeah, I liked it.
Did anybody figure it out? Figure things out?
Yeah.
I mean, towards the end, I sort of thought that when we was first introduced to the chief of police or whatever she was, I suddenly started to think, oh, hold on a second, there's
Yeah.
nothing here, you know. But it was no sort of, I didn't realise that the main perpetrator was going to be another police officer. That I never saw coming, but certainly I started to think, hold on. But I love the way it kept giving you these red herrings, because I thought that the girl who was working with Frank Travis, you know, it kept hinting that she might have something to do with it, and she didn't. I like the fact that Rebecca kept, you know, they went there thinking it was one other day to be left on the island, but it was the last day, and you never knew what happened to the brother. And then there was this, I was trying to think, did he have something to do with this? Was this sort of a drug deal? And but you never really knew. And it was exactly what Vera was saying, trying to work it out, constantly trying to work it out as you're going forward. Love this book, love this book.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Were you surprised by the way it ended?
Little. Yeah, I wasn't real sure how it would end, but I've, you know, something I just sort of thought something didn't quite gel with it. That all these people protecting anything to do with this serial rapist and then murderer. I thought, you know, I can't believe someone so high up would have, you know, gone to all that trouble for her, and it wasn't really her blood brother, but a brother. You know, I'd be, you know, I'm sorry, mate. I have to do something for you because you're not going to stop here. And that was the only disappointing part of it. Other than that, I love the pace. I don't get that, you know, I go with the flow of the author. I mean, I'm not going to look into really, really intricate bits and think about, you know, number of cars, etc., coming over and all that kind of thing. But so long as it gives me an answer to certain things, I'm happy with that. And I loved its pace. It was just that didn't just the chief, that woman, the chief of detectives, I just thought, nah. And then why is she going to this, and why is she leaving her alive? You know, I just sort of, I don't know how I would have ended this, but it was one of the ones I didn't see coming, and I wouldn't have chosen that as an ending. But I don't know what other ending I would have chosen. So it's the author's book, but I still, you know, no, Foley should have, you know, he should have been drowned at birth, I think. But anyway, so, but then we wouldn't have had the book. But I don't know. It's just, that was the thing that just irked me. Other than that, I thought it was really great, and I loved it.
So, were people satisfied by the ending?
Yeah. I felt that the ending didn't really match the book, the rest of the book, if you know what I mean. It was like a very easy way out. You know, it'd all been building up, and then it just went, oh, right, I'm going to spare you. It's okay. You know, you can live, and we'll just forget everything happened. So it was a bit, I don't know. But as Lorraine says, I don't know how you would have ended it, short of killing off Rebecca.
Yeah.
You know?
As long as the dog survived, that's all that matters.
You can never kill the dog.
Can't kill the dog.
Never kill the dog.
Yeah, never kill the dog. So would you read, a few of you have actually already said, the question is, would you read another book by this author? And I think at least 3 of you have already said you would read or are going to read another one of the Raker books.
Yeah, I will also try one of the Reiki books, but I'm like Craig. I think it was Craig that said I need to start from the first, so I'm a bit dreading to start another series.
Well, I do because characters have stories, don't they?
Yeah. And then I get a bit stressed if I'm like reading the 14 and I know, oh no, but I'm missing lots of stuff. So yeah, but I'm thinking on reading one of them. Yeah.
I mean, there are people introduced as the books go along, so they keep it recurring in later books. So if you haven't read the previous ones, you might wonder where these people come from.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, I have to read series in order because the main characters.
None of you are helping me with this, and my huge pile of
No, I don't mind in what order I read the books. I have a theory that the first and second in a series are usually not as strong, that the author usually hits their stride by the third one, roughly. And so I don't mind. I usually borrow them from the library, and so I just borrow whatever is available. And if you do want to start with, well, probably the latest one, as I said, I haven't read it, but the previous one, The Blackbird, I do recommend it. I did really like it. So if you're looking to read it sort of as a more standalone and don't mind which one it is.
So is Reiki like a private detective rather than
no, he's a civilian investigator.
Okay.
I haven't read the Reiki books, it's what I've researched. He's a ex-journalist and just investigates missing person cases. His wife died a year before the first Reiki book.
Okay. Oh.
So I quite like the old private detective sort of things. I read all the Lennox books.
Yeah, so he's a civilian investigator. I don't know whether there's any license involved or not. So does anybody have anything else they want to say on Missing Pieces or the Reiki series or the weather?
I go to Bay Ridge a couple of times a year, so I was excited that he chose Bay Ridge as a location. I wish, and I'm familiar with Windsor Terrace too, and I just wish he would have, I felt awkward about asking him why he chose that location in particular. And it has a lot of interesting features, which maybe he had intended to incorporate into the story and then he decided not to. But it's really a unusual part of Brooklyn and a real melting pot. So every block is a different country in the UN, you might say. So it's a very, very interesting part of Brooklyn.
All right. Did you recognize it in the book?
Only because he mentioned the streets and the location, the home where the brother and sister grew up is really close to where I get my coffee when I'm there. I wish he would have plugged some of the coffee shops and restaurants that are in that area.
Yeah. Anybody else have anything else they want to say? But I really like that you knew the area, Ellen.
Yeah, but just on that point as well.
Sorry, Lorraine.
Yeah, just on that point as well, he did mention that, he is English. So when he's writing about America, he didn't want to get too involved in that because American readers will be going, well, that's, this, that, and the other. So maybe he just sort of glossed over that area. But, yeah, so I get what he meant on that one. But yeah, Brooklyn is a melting pot. You can go from one part of it to another and it's a completely different, you feel like you're in a completely different country. Like you can go from Central America to another place completely. So yeah, Brooklyn's great.
Okay. Right, I'll try not to kick you all out this time. They've moved it. I found it.